Welcome to Michelle's Podcast News, where we bring you the latest updates from the podcasting world. I am your host, Michelle Tandler, and today we have some exciting news to share. Let's dive right in. First on the docket today, we have an incredible update from the world of high-profile podcast deals. Alex Cooper, the host, creator, and executive producer of the popular Call Her Daddy podcast, has just inked a monumental deal with Sirius XM Holdings Incorporated. Sirius XM has signed a multi-year agreement that will see them gain exclusive rights to sell advertisements on both the audio and video versions of Cooper's show, as well as bonus content and events. The deal is reportedly worth an astonishing $100 million over more than 3 years. This information comes from a source familiar with the arrangement. For those who may not know, Alex Cooper is one of the world's leading podcasters. She previously worked exclusively with Spotify Technology SA to distribute her program, which has amassed over 4 million followers. According to Edison Research, Call Her Daddy was the 7th most popular podcast in the United States in the first quarter of this year. The Sirius XM deal also extends to podcasts on Cooper's Unwell network, including shows from influencers such as Alex Earl and Madeline Argy. Scott Greenstein, Sirius XM's president, expressed his excitement about the partnership, stating, "Alex's fearless, unfiltered approach, where no topic is off the table, has created a passionate and dedicated fan base that is unmatched in podcasting and perfectly aligns with the content that Sirius XM subscribers have come to love and expect from us." While a representative for Cooper declined to comment on the deal, Sirius XM plans to start introducing exclusive content in 2025. The announcement has already had a positive impact on Sirius XM's stock, which rose by as much as 7.2% to $3.26 in New York following the news. This is not the first time Sirius XM has made headlines with a massive podcasting deal. Earlier this year, the company signed a 3-year agreement worth over $100 million with Smartless, a podcast hosted by actors Will Arnett, Jason Bateman, and Sean Hayes. Additionally, just this month, Sirius XM launched a new subscription offering on Apple Podcasts, providing ad-free episodes for $5.99 a month with Call Her Daddy included in that bundle. Bloomberg intelligence analysts Geetha Ranganathan and Kevin Neer believe that exclusive content is crucial for Sirius XM, especially as their contract with Howard Stern is set to expire in 2025. They noted that deals like the one with Alex Cooper could help reinvigorate subscriber growth for the company. That wraps up this segment of Michelle's Podcast News. Stay tuned as we dive into more news from the podcasting world. Next up, we have some exciting news for Apple Podcast users, especially those on Windows. Apple Podcasts can now be accessed through web browsers, including Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Mozilla Firefox, and others. This means that you no longer need to use an Apple device to listen to your favorite podcasts on Apple Podcasts. This move is part of Apple's broader strategy to make its services more web-friendly. Recently, Apple also launched the beta version of Apple Maps on the web, but notably, Apple Podcasts on the web is not in beta. You can easily access it by navigating to https://podcasts.apple.com/US browse in your browser of choice. The web experience for Apple Podcasts is very similar to what you would find on a Mac or an iPad. Our friends over at iMore tested Apple Podcasts with the Arc browser and reported a positive experience. There's a good chance that you'll have the same smooth experience on any modern browser. Interestingly, you do not even need an Apple account to use Apple Podcasts on the web. However, having one will allow you to sync your listening progress across multiple devices, which is a nice added benefit. This development is significant because it shows Apple is warming up to the idea of making its services more accessible across different platforms, including Windows. Earlier this year, Apple rolled out official apps for Apple Music, Apple TV, and Apple devices for Windows. And now, with Apple Podcasts on the web, it seems like the tech giant is closing the gap even further. Microsoft, on the other hand, has been more open to putting its apps on competitor devices for the last several years. For example, Microsoft had apps ready for Apple Vision Pro right after the device launched. It seems like Apple is now taking a page out of Microsoft's book, albeit slowly. While it is great to see Apple making these moves, it is still surprising that it took this long. The company held on to iTunes for far too long, and many of its services should have had web apps at launch. But, as the saying goes, better late than never. So, if you are a Windows user who loves Apple Podcasts, you can now enjoy your favorite shows without any hassle. Just open your preferred web browser, head to the Apple Podcast website, and start listening. Next up, we're diving into some fascinating research from Edison Research, which delves into the habits of podcast listeners. The study is aptly titled Down the Rabbit Hole: Podcast Listening Among Podcast Listeners, and it offers some intriguing insights. According to Edison Research's Share of ER study, once people start listening to podcasts, they often find themselves getting hooked and filling more of their days and nights with podcast content. The Share of Ear study involves respondents keeping a detailed one-day diary of all their audio listening. By isolating those who reported spending any time with podcasts on their diary day, the study reveals some interesting patterns. A robust 21% of all Americans aged 13 and older fall into the category of podcast listeners. And among these listeners, a whopping 34% of their daily audio time is spent listening to podcasts. This makes podcasting the biggest chunk of their daily audio consumption, surpassing other forms of audio entertainment. Following podcasts, the next largest portion of their listening time goes to radio. Podcast listeners spend 21% of their daily audio time with AM/FM radio and radio streams. Then, streaming music comes in third, accounting for 17% of their daily audio time. The data supports what Edison Research calls the rabbit hole thesis. Once people discover the vast array of options and the entertainment and informational value podcasts provide, they tend to devote more and more of their time to this ever-emerging medium. It's like falling into a wonderland of endless possibilities and fascinating content. In fact, the study uses a metaphor from Alice in Wonderland to describe this phenomenon. Once Alice finally reached the end of her fall down the rabbit hole, she found the loveliest garden you ever saw. This is a fitting description for the world of podcasting, where listeners can explore a beautiful and diverse landscape of shows and topics. In our final segment today, we turn our attention to an important issue that is currently making waves in the Australian political landscape. Crossbench members of Parliament are calling on the government to extend a proposed ban on gambling advertisements to include podcasts. This move comes as the Labour Party continues to consult on its reform package, which has been described by some as watered down. During recent briefings with media companies and gambling reform advocates, the government has not clearly addressed the fate of gambling advertising revenue generated by audio platforms like Spotify. This has left a significant gap in the proposed reforms, as these platforms rake in substantial revenue from gambling advertisements. Independent Member of Parliament Andrew Wilkie is among the voices advocating for more comprehensive restrictions. I feel strongly that a ban, or at least the restrictions envisaged by the government, should apply to all media, including podcasts, said Wilkie. Independent Member of Parliament Allegra Spender also weighed in on the issue, stating, "The evidence is clear that partial bans do not work." She called for the major parties to allow a free vote on the legislation, highlighting some discontent within Labour's own ranks regarding the current approach. The call for extending the ban to podcasts underscores a broader concern about the effectiveness of piecemeal reforms. Advocates argue that without a comprehensive approach, the impact of any advertising restrictions will be significantly diluted. As the government continues its consultations, the fate of gambling advertisements on podcasts remains uncertain. However, the push from independent members of Parliament and reform advocates signals that this issue is far from settled. That's all for today's episode of Michelle's Podcast News. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you found today's updates informative. Join us again tomorrow for more news from the podcasting world. Until then, this is Michelle Tandler signing off. Have a great day.